Let's talk about why these kanji are used for the Japanese word for clock. Why? I don't know, why not? You got space in your brain, let's go. So if you're like me, why? That's a bad decision. Why would you do that to yourself? But you probably thought that the Japanese word for clock, toke, is just the representation that has always been, right? It's a time measurer. And while, the kanji for time is usually read as ji or toki, it's logical to assume that the ki just kind of, flipped out there because the onyomi of the second kanji is indeed ke. And while it would be a bit strange to have a kunyomi at the front of a word and an onyomi at the second, it's not impossible. There's even a name for it, which is yutoyomi. And something like butaniku is an example of that. But this is not the original representation of the Japanese word for clock. Instead, it is this. Now, the first character here is, of course, ground or dirt, and that is read as to or do, so that's where the to comes from. And the second character is not used in Japanese anymore, but is read as ke in the onyomi, and means like corner, etc. So the kunyomi is kado, just like the current Japanese word for corner, written in this kanji though. Unsurprisingly, the first users of this kanji pair were Chinese people, but Chinese people a long time ago. Because this pair, which is now pronounced like this in Chinese, originally referred to a device that is on the ground and that uses angles, corner, right, angles, whatever, to measure the position of the sun for a number of reasons, but one is obviously telling time, although it seems like initially it was more for seasons, etc., rather than time of day. But for instance, if you type these characters into Google Images, you will find what look to be sundials. This is apparently a pretty old word. Japanese people certainly don't use it, and it seems like Chinese people don't either to refer to sundials. Here's the current Japanese word for sundial, just in case you're curious. But this kanji combination came over to Japan, along with, of course, the technology, and was used to mean sundial at least into the Heian period. How did it become clock though? Well, general consensus is that clocks moved to Japan in the 1500s, a few hundred years after they were invented in Europe, and had a number of names. One of them is jimeisho, which is like self-sounding bell or potentially timer clock, which is kind of cool. But they were also called, using Japanese words, tokihakari, which makes sense because they are time measurers. And what kanji would you use to write the word tokihakari? Well, time and measure. And while this is a pretty dead word for a clock, you will find examples of it in Japan, such as this company that sells watches that has used tokihakari as their name. Whether Japanese consumers find that really interesting or just kind of weird and lame, I don't know, but it exists. Until around the Meiji period or so, it did seem like the sundial representation was used to refer to clocks. Now you might think, why not make a new word? A sundial is not a clock. Well, yeah, but we don't always do that. Like, I live in Australia, which is very influenced by British English, and so what I would call a flashlight, they call a torch. Now there's obviously a difference between a stick that is on fire and a battery-powered device which shows light, but they both can be used to shed light on things, so I guess, fine. Although I have always wondered if young Australians hearing about like Frankenstein and stuff, wonder if the villagers are charging the castle with a bunch of flashlights. And I guess Japanese people thought it was a bit strange to keep the kanji representation using the old sundial representation over time, because we did see change to other representations, such as this one here, which I was able to find used in a book from the 1800s, or this one here, which of course interestingly have the tokei representation we use now, but spread across the two different representations. But slowly though, somehow people decided to combine the word toke with the tokihakari representation, but I can't really find out when this happened. Like, here's a book from 1689 that uses what we would now read as toke, but the problem is we don't know if it's intended to be read that way. This could be tokihakari. So yeah, because we're kind of working with written data here, it does seem a bit tricky to find out the exact moment when people started using the representation we use now to mean clock quite regularly. But minimally, we know it was not the first way that the word toke meaning clock was written in kanji. And we do know that Japanese people played with a number of variants until they settled on the one that we have now. But yeah, you know what? You're right. Probably could spend a lot more time researching for this video that most people have probably given up on watching because, like, why would you watch a video on the history of the Japanese word clock? And find out kind of exactly when the toke we use now became a normative representation, but look at the time.